Hi friends, Amy with Passings here. This is video number 3 in our series, Living Here Now. In this video, we're going to talk about here. How big is our world? I know for most of us, it seems like our world has gotten simultaneously very, very small. It's the size of our home. But at the same time, we're very aware that we're connected with the entire world. That's what pandemic means, all the people. So I'm allowed to touch only a couple people. At the same time, I feel connected to all of the people, and every one of my actions can affect other people. If I choose to stay inside, if I choose to wash my hands before I go out and after I come home, if I choose to call a patient who is living and perhaps dying alone in a hospital room or in their home in a facility, I am connected to others in ways that my physical experience of here doesn't seem to connect with. So, living in a very tiny space, being connected to the whole. When my son was first born, my world got very small. I had been a professor up until that point. I took a leave of absence to give birth to him and to raise him, the beginning of his life. And I had been used to connecting with lots of people every day. I had students and I had colleagues, and I had so many ways of interacting. And then, because I chose to stay home with my little boy, my world got really small, much like we're experiencing now. My world was my home. And I remember one time I was wearing him on the front of me in one of those baby carriers because he loved to be carried. And we were at my mom's house. He was about a month old, I think. And I had laid out the newspaper all along her kitchen counters. And I was walking because he liked movement. And I was walking past the newspaper so that I could read snippets of it. And I would turn and I would walk back the other way and read snippets of it. And my mom came in and she said, Amy, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm just trying to keep up on things. This was before cell phones and before I used the internet a lot. I said, I'm just trying to keep up on the world. My world has become so small. I'm not connected to anything. And she paused and she gave me kind of a mom look. And she said, I remember what that's like. From when you and your sister and brother were little, I remember feeling like my world was suddenly tiny. But I promise, Amy love, it'll get bigger again. It'll get bigger again faster than you know. And of course, she was right. Those of us who have raised children know that those early times pass so quickly from this vantage point. And quickly enough, I was out in the world again with my son, doing all little boy things and little kid things. My world got bigger. What I didn't realize then, but I definitely know now, is that my world was just as large, even though my surroundings had shrunk. It had the capacity to be just as large because that capacity to connect with others, the capacity to have here be an infinite space rather than a really tiny space, that's within each of us. I didn't learn it when Owen was a baby, but I learned it the next year. So about a year after the newspaper episode, I was in a cardiac ICU. And I was waiting and hoping for some kind of miracle. I got the miracle eventually, had a miracle surgery to put a little pause on my condition. But my world was even smaller. My world had shrunk to the size of my hospital room. And at first they let me walk around a little bit. So my world could include the hallway. But then one of my doctors said, absolutely not. She is not allowed out of that bed. So my world shrunk again to the size of my bed. But what I found at that time was my world was also infinite. I was connecting with friends and loved ones in intimate ways, even though they weren't there with me. In fact, what I realized was that I was connecting with people more closely, with more presence, with more here-ness than I was when we would meet for coffee or when we would talk on the phone in between, making dinner and cleaning up the house. When I would connect in those ways, I wasn't all there with them. I wasn't all here with them. But when all there was me in my bed on the phone and them in their home on the phone, there was much more of a sense of togetherness. I don't know how that all works. It's a mystery. But that is a liminal space. That's an example of a liminal space, that I am living with someone, very close with someone, who's not here in the tangible space that I inhabit. One way I like to think of that difference, we talked about liminal space and liminal time versus tangible space and tangible time in the first video. We'll bring it up again when we talk next time about now. But in terms of space, when we're thinking of tangible space, that's space that we fill. And we fill with objects that we can touch. So if I have an empty room, that's a tangible space, and I can fill it with a hospital bed or a newspaper or a telephone. Liminal space has nothing to do with that. Liminal space is already full. And it's full of things that are not seen, things that are known in the heart, in our being. Liminal space then is something that we enter into. Tangible space we also enter into, but we can fill it. Liminal space we enter into the fullness that's already there. 15 years after that hospital stint, I was on a Learjet being flown from Denver, Colorado to Rochester, Minnesota to have what we hoped was another miracle surgery, and indeed it was. I had been strapped into the stretcher and rolled out of my hospital room in the ICU, taken in an ambulance to the airport and put on this plane, still in the stretcher, of course. And I remember hearing the pilot talking with ground control. And he said, "We have 5 souls on the plane and we're ready to go." And there were 5 bodies on that plane. There was the pilot, the co-pilot, a nurse, a medical technician, and myself. So 5 bodies. And I remember I was in a lot of different places in terms of my cognitive capacity in that moment. I had a lot of medications, obviously. And I kept pondering that phrase the whole flight. 5 souls on board, 5 souls on board. And I've since learned that's how it's used. That term is used, souls rather than bodies or people. When we talk about, when a pilot is giving information about the bodies on the plane. But throughout that whole ride, I kept thinking, that whole airplane ride, I kept thinking, it sure feels like more than 5 souls on this plane. On this plane was that little boy who was no longer a little boy, his little sister, who were way far below us, trying to go about their daily lives with the help of my parents. My parents, who were worried, of course, were also on that plane. My husband, who at that moment was speeding below us somewhere in a car so that he could get to Minnesota quickly, he was also on that plane. There were so many souls with me on that plane, and I could feel them. There were 5 bodies, but that plane was full of souls. And I know that you've been through something like this. Perhaps it wasn't in that kind of situation, but you felt the presence of a loved one who hasn't been here with you in the physical world, but in this liminal space, you have known that they were there. In times like this, during this COVID-19 pandemic, we are invited to live in both, to stay within our very tiny, tangible world, most of us, the confines of our home, if we are blessed to have a home. So our physical, tangible world has shrunk. But we're invited to, through the portal of that tangible world, however it is, whether it's on the phone, whether it's through the internet, whether it's through prayer or meditation or song, we are invited to enter into a place where many more souls exist than we can count in bodies around us. That is the place of pure potential, love, life, wellness. It's the place where everything can be found. Some people would say that's the place where God is. There's an ancient story that I love dearly about place and about the tangible and the liminal in terms of space. It is told in the book of Genesis of the Hebrew Scriptures. It's a story about a fellow named Jacob. And Jacob was not the most ethical or moral person at all. He had tricked his brother out of his birthright. His brother was slightly older. They're twins. His brother Esau was slightly older than he. He had tricked his brother into giving up his birthright to him, which is a huge thing in ancient Israel. Ancient pre-Israel. Hang on to that moment and just hang on to that phrase. We'll get to it in just a moment. He had tricked his father, who was old and blind, into blessing him instead of Esau with the blessing of the firstborn son. So he wasn't the greatest guy ever. And I say that because it's important. Sometimes when we hear these stories about ancient sages, we can think, oh, I can't ever do that. They're special. In the Hebrew Scriptures, in the later Christian Bible, in every text that I know of from every wisdom tradition, we are told stories of regular folks. And the beauty of that is that then we can say, hey, I've messed up just like Jacob. I've done bad things. I have acted in ways I regret. The beauty of that is then we can see we still get the blessings. We still get the wonderful treasures that someone like Jacob gets. And here's one of the ones that he gets. He's on the road with a bunch of his people. He's got 2 wives, 2 female slaves, 11 kids at this point, 11 sons at this point. I don't know how many children, but 11 sons. Lots of stuff. He's kind of on the run because he's done this horrible thing of cheating his brother out of his birthright. And one night he has to rest. And so he lies down to rest. And he takes a stone and he makes that into his pillow. He lies his head on the pillow. And during the night he has a miraculous dream, vision, maybe a visitation. In this, he's shown a ladder that's reaching from him, from this place in the world, on the planet, up to the heavens. And he sees angels going up and down, up and down. And symbolically, of course, we can understand that to mean that he's shown a connection between human and divine. He's also shown that connection between the very tangible place that is a rock underneath his head, and all that exists in the realm of creation, in the realm of possibility. He sees that connection. He knows it in his heart, that connection. And when he awakens the next day, he is overwhelmed. And he said, just this place, it's just a place. And God was here all along. But I didn't know it. So he names that place Bethel, which means house of God. And this is true for every home. Every home is a house of God. But it's important to remember that he started by noticing, this is a rock. I'm going to use this rock. My teacher, Father Richard Rohr, talks about this, that if you can't find love, if you can't find God in a rock, don't bother with something as complex as a human. Start with the simple. That tangible can be a portal into, just like with his dream, it can be a portal from this small world that can feel so tiny, so confining, into the realm of all possibility and all love. Sometimes in some of the workshops that I've done, and a few of you might remember, we do an exercise where we connect with a rock, which sounds really, really odd. But I've heard the greatest stories about people and what they've felt when they've taken the time simply to be with what's here now, which in this case is just a little stone. When we let ourselves go into the tininess of what's here, there's magic there, and we can somehow be transported into the realm of everything. I just read in our town's little next door neighbor newsletter list. I think probably most of you know about those. There's a young girl here who has painted dozens and dozens of rocks to look like ladybugs. And her mom posted an email that said, hey, we're going to go out with, these are all totally clean. We wash them and we sanitize them, and they are not, you're not in danger of catching the virus if you touch them. But we have left them throughout the neighborhood. And these rocks are ladybugs, and on the bottom they have a little heart. And I adore that. Ladybugs have long been a symbol in several cultures of good luck. And so when you find a living ladybug in your house, that's supposed to be good luck. And I think what precious luck for someone to find a rock that this sweet young girl has devoted herself to painting. She's never going to see the people who hold this rock. She will not probably be in the same tiny space in the tangible world that they inhabit. But through her devotion and through her love and just through her kind heart, she is connected to them through this liminal space. So my wish for each of us is that as we are fortunate to shelter at home, for those of us who are, for those of us who have a home, for those of us who have the great good fortune to be able to stay there in a safe place, my wish for all of us, my blessing for all of us, is that we love both the tangible and the liminal. May we each be here now in the ways that are tiny and the ways that are beyond imagination. May we know that this is the place of God, or love, or life, or hope. Thank you.